One bad decision, one moment of reckless showmanship. That's all it took to turn viral video attempts into the 6 most horrifying prank fatalities ever documented. These aren't just tragic accidents from dangerous stunts. They're stark reminders that in the pursuit of online fame, the smallest miscalculation can exact the ultimate price. It was March 15, 2016. In a small Riverside, California studio, the camera faced a cramped kitchen corner where synthetic curtains skimmed an old baseboard heater and paper towels leaned beside a bottle of cooking oil. Eve Hollowell, 22, split her time between classes and a customer service job. Friends called her calm and agreeable, the kind of person who volunteered to hold the light when someone else had an idea. Alistair Holloway, 24, worked nights moving freight and poured his off hours into short online videos. He was confident, impulsive, and convinced that the next clip would be the one that stuck. They were a couple filming together, chasing a moment. The prop was simple, a can of aerosol deodorant and a cheap lighter. Alistair told Eve he wanted to do a quick flash of flame as a harmless scare for the camera, just a brief trick to make her jump. He assured her the flame would stay small. The window was shut, the fan off, the extinguisher non-existent. Eve's blouse was light polyester, loose at the sleeves. Her hair had hold from an earlier spray. The tripod was set so the frame caught them both from only a few feet away. Nothing about the space forgave heat. What happened next was later reconstructed from the camera that continued recording in the corner of the room. The first press of the nozzle met flame and turned into a bright cone, roughly 3 to 4 feet long. In a tight room, that distance vanished. Eve flinched, surprised. The flame was far larger than what Alistair had claimed it would be. The plume skated forward and climbed. The blouse ignited with the fast plastic edge of synthetic fiber. The melting fabric shrank and adhered to skin. Her hair flashed over. She moved backward into the counter. Hip knocking the oil bottle, Alistair dropped the lighter and grabbed a cotton dish towel, pressing at the fire that clung and spread. The alarm screamed. The towel charred and failed. He tossed a small pot of water in panic. The splash struck the hot, oily surface and flared, lifting heat and smoke into the space. The air turned black and bitter. Eve's sleeves and torso showed advancing fire. Her hands struck at the flames, the skin already darkening in the heat. Smoke rolled up into the ceiling, thick and toxic from synthetics. Investigators later reviewed the footage frame by frame to verify the sequence and confirm what the camera captured. Her knees buckled. There were rasping breaths, soot streaking the skin around her nose and lips. The room dimmed with soot. The camera still recording. Neighbors pounded down the hallway, and someone shouted for help. A call for responders went out as the remaining flames consumed what they could and dwindled into hot, smoky patches. Fire crews forced the door and hit hotspots. Paramedics lifted Eve and moved fast. Full-thickness burns mapped her face, neck, arms, and chest, where fabric had melted and stuck. Airway injury was evident. Harsh sounds, swelling from superheated gases and toxic smoke. An advanced airway was attempted, but the damage was severe and immediate. She lost pulses shortly after removal from the unit. Despite aggressive airway management and fluid resuscitation, Eve went into cardiac arrest en route to the hospital. The combination of airway swelling and full-thickness burns left medics with no viable intervention. The medical examiner later confirmed her death was caused by inhalation injury and extensive full-thickness thermal burns. Fire investigators reviewed the footage and confirmed the ignition occurred during a prank in which Alistair attempted a quick flame scare for the camera. Alistair was charged with involuntary manslaughter and received 3 years in prison after pleading guilty. The building dried out with fans. Soot stained the ceiling. Warnings went up about aerosols and ignition. A life reduced to a small apartment's distances, 3 or 4 feet of flame, a few strides to the counter, a door just beyond thickening smoke. The story closed with paperwork, a cause listed as clothing ignition during an improvised prank, and a reminder that heat, fuel, and oxygen do not forgive showmanship. It was August 22, 2017. Interstate 285 cut through Atlanta's evening rush, 6 lanes of steady traffic moving at highway speeds. Alexander Fox, 35, spent his days investigating insurance claims, documenting accidents, and calculating risk. The work had made him cautious by nature, methodical in his approach to danger, but divorce papers and a recent move to Georgia had left him questioning everything, including the careful boundaries he'd built around his life. His teenage nephew had driven down from Tennessee with friends for a family barbecue. The kid was 17, loud, and convinced that his uncle had become boring since the separation. The idea started as a prank that his nephew and his friends were planning for their social media page. They told Alexander that traffic on the nearby stretch of Interstate 285 had been slowed to a crawl because of lane closure work, and that stepping onto the shoulder would be safe for a quick joke video. They positioned themselves with their phones ready, intending to film his reaction when he realized they had exaggerated the empty lanes. Alexander had been drinking beer in the heat. His judgment felt loose, his usual risk assessment clouded by alcohol and the sting of being called predictable. Wanting to prove he was not uptight as they claimed, Alexander believed them when they said the highway was mostly stopped anyway. In reality, only a single maintenance truck was parked farther down the shoulder, something the teens pointed at to sell the prank. Beyond the hill, traffic was still moving at full interstate speed. The location was a straight stretch where traffic crested a hill about 200 yards away, limiting sight lines for approaching drivers. At that distance, drivers had no more than 2 seconds to register his presence and react, far below the time needed to stop safely at highway speed. His leather dress shoes had smooth soles, wrong for running on hot asphalt. Believing the prank about slowed traffic, Alexander stepped off the shoulder, expecting only a few slow-moving cars. He accelerated across the nearest lane, narrowly avoiding a sedan. His footing slipped slightly at the lane marker, costing him a crucial second. A tractor trailer in the second lane swerved hard, its air brakes hissing, which caused vehicles behind it to brake suddenly. He reached the third lane as traffic crested the distant hill. The approaching vehicles had maybe 2 or 3 seconds to react when he appeared in their path. A pickup truck in the fourth lane locked its brakes, ABS chattering against the pavement, but physics had already taken over. The impact occurred at roughly 45 miles per hour. Alexander's body was thrown 30 feet forward, striking the asphalt and tumbling across painted lane lines. The collision triggered a chain reaction of crashes behind the initial impact. His pelvis showed obvious instability, and both legs were deformed. Paramedics noted abdominal distension consistent with internal bleeding. Bystanders waved frantically to slow oncoming traffic, while his nephew called for help. Emergency responders faced gridlock trying to reach the median where Alexander lay bleeding. His skin grew pale as shock set in from massive internal injuries, despite attempts to control external bleeding. The damage was too extensive. Paramedics found only faint, agonal respirations and a weak pulse that faded during initial treatment. Despite CPR and rapid trauma care, they could not restore circulation. The medical examiner later confirmed that Alexander died from massive internal bleeding, caused by blunt force trauma. The highway stayed closed for hours while crews cleared debris. Alexander's ex-wife later created a small mental health foundation in his name. The truck driver required counseling after the collision. What began as a family gathering ended in yellow tape, and reports documenting how personal pain and peer pressure overrode years of caution. Investigators later confirmed that Alexander entered the roadway after being misled into thinking traffic had been slowed for construction, a prank his nephew admitted was never meant to push him into real danger. The case was classified as an accidental death, and the nephew faced a reckless endangerment charge for setting up and recording the prank that led Alexander into the lanes. It was December 7th, 2015. The downtown subway platform buzzed with evening commuters as trains rumbled through tunnels beneath Manhattan. Grace Montgomery, 16, balanced her time between track practice and classes at a Queens high school. She was fast, competitive, and tired of being dismissed by classmates who saw her as too serious, too focused on grades and athletics to be interesting. 2 older students had cornered her near the platform edge during the ride home. They were 17 and 18, the kind who filmed staged reaction clips for their social media accounts. They told Grace they wanted a quick joke video where she would pretend to run alongside a departing train for a second, so they could edit it later to look like subway surfing. Grace wore her school uniform and carried a heavy backpack loaded with textbooks. Her shoes had minimal grip, designed for hallways rather than moving trains. The platform was crowded enough to provide cover, and commuters were too focused on their phones to notice the 2 older classmates crowding Grace near the yellow safety line. Grace believed she was only supposed to jog beside the train for a brief moment, not actually grab onto it, and the older students kept their phones raised to film the prank. The tunnel between stations stretched nearly a mile through darkness, lined with signal equipment and electrical hazards. The third rail carried 625 volts of direct current, enough to stop a heart instantly. Clearances were tight, designed for trains rather than human bodies clinging to their exteriors. When the downtown express began pulling away, Grace ran alongside the accelerating cars. Her hands found the rear coupling mechanism, and she pulled herself onto the narrow maintenance platform at the back of the last car. The train quickly reached 35 miles per hour as it entered the tunnel. The two older classmates stayed behind on the platform, recording until the train disappeared into the darkness. They later told investigators they expected her to stop after a few steps and had no idea she would actually grab onto the train. After 30 seconds, the train hit a curve, and Grace felt her backpack catch on something solid. The impact jerked her sideways, and she lost her grip with her left hand. Now she hung by one arm while her feet dragged along the track bed, her shoes scraping against the ballast stones and rail edges. Footage later showed her struggling to pull herself upward as the tunnel clearance narrowed ahead. Her strength was failing, her palms slick with sweat. The grip gave out completely, and she fell between the tracks, her body striking the electrified third rail. 625 volts of direct current surged through her body, causing immediate cardiac arrest and rigid muscle contraction. Her body stiffened from the electrical current, then collapsed off the rail into the track bed once the contact broke. Transit workers located her during a post-run inspection approximately 12 minutes later. The power had to be shut down across the entire subway line before emergency responders could safely enter the tunnel and extract her body. Grace was pronounced dead at the scene from electrocution and severe electrical burns. Her family later filed a claim alleging inadequate safety measures, prompting a review of tunnel access and security practices. What started as a staged prank, meant to capture a harmless reaction clip, ended in a tunnel designed for machines, not teenagers navigating split-second decisions. Grace's instinct to push herself took over at the worst possible moment, turning a staged prank into a deadly encounter with a tunnel built for machines, not people. Transit police reviewed security footage and witness statements, confirming the incident as an accidental electrocution during subway surfing. The two older students were charged with reckless endangerment for staging the prank and misleading Grace into believing she only needed to run beside the train. It was June 18, 2018. The remote highway bridge stretched across a Colorado canyon, 200 feet above rocky terrain and a fast-moving river. The canyon walls were narrow in several sections, leaving little clearance if a climber swung sideways on a rope. Jasper Kincaid, 28, made his living teaching outdoor recreation at an adventure company near Colorado Springs. His expertise lay in rope work, safety protocols, and risk management. Colleagues knew him as meticulous, someone who triple-checked anchor points and never cut corners when lives were on the line. 4 college friends had driven up from Denver for Jasper's birthday weekend. They were celebrating at a campsite when someone suggested filming a light-hearted reaction clip as a joke gift. The idea was simple. Jasper would lean forward over the bridge with a rope tied to him, while the others pretended he was about to do a full bungee jump. The friends were enthusiastic, but inexperienced, and the prank quickly grew sloppy as alcohol and teasing pushed the setup forward. Jasper initially refused. His professional training screamed warnings about using climbing rope for anything resembling a real jump. He agreed only after they repeatedly told him the rope was meant to support just a short, controlled lean for the joke video, not an actual drop. He trusted his climbing expertise even as his instincts warned him about the improvised setup. But the teasing escalated, pushing the prank further than Jasper was comfortable with. His friends called him hypocritical, pointing out that he made a living from dangerous activities. They accused him of becoming too cautious, forgetting how to have fun. The alcohol clouded his judgment, and eventually, his resistance cracked. They secured a long length of dynamic climbing rope to the bridge's steel guardrail, using multiple anchor points. Jasper tied the other end around his ankles, only because he believed he would be leaning over the edge for a few feet, not dropping into the canyon. The bridge stood 180 feet above the canyon floor, far farther than he realized the rope had been measured for. The fall began before Jasper realized the setup had shifted into something far more dangerous than the prank he agreed to. Jasper fell freely for 150 feet, about 3 seconds of fall, reaching roughly 65 to 67 miles per hour before the rope went tight. But when the rope reached its limit, there was no gradual deceleration. Instead of stretching smoothly like a bungee cord, the climbing rope snapped taut with devastating force. The force spike was far beyond what the temporary guardrail bolts were designed to handle. Although several guardrail bolts deformed and one anchor plate bent under the load, the multi-point rig held long enough for the rope to transfer a catastrophic shock through his body. The sudden stop snapped through his lower legs and drove a massive compression force up his spine. The sudden stop swung him violently in a pendulum arc, slamming him into the canyon wall. On the second impact, his head struck a rocky outcropping with sickening force, fracturing his skull and causing immediate brain trauma. His friends watched the rope jerk violently, then saw him hanging motionless far below, partly obscured by the canyon's narrow walls. They had no proper lowering system, no rescue training, and no way to safely retrieve him. Their celebration had become a nightmare. The rescue took 45 minutes. Search and rescue teams had to rappel from the bridge using proper equipment, while Jasper remained suspended, unconscious, and bleeding. By the time rescuers reached him, he still had a faint pulse but showed no signs of consciousness. He lost pulses shortly after being lowered to the canyon floor, and paramedics could not restore circulation. He was pronounced dead on the scene due to catastrophic trauma. The medical examiner later confirmed that Jasper died from massive blunt force trauma, including spinal fractures, internal hemorrhage, and severe head injury. Sheriff investigators determined that the climbing rope used for bungee jumping created forces far exceeding safe parameters, with non-rated anchor points contributing to the fatal outcome. Jasper's friends were charged with reckless endangerment for staging the prank and misleading him into believing the rope was only meant for a brief lean over the edge. It was April 3, 2016. Spring break had arrived in Tampa, giving Blair Rodriguez a rare week away from teaching 7th grade science. At 42, she was known for making chemistry fun and safe in the classroom, though at home those habits sometimes softened. Her 8-year-old daughter was restless, and Blair decided to entertain her with a dramatic backyard experiment after seeing online tutorials of simple, fizzing pool chemical reactions. That morning, her daughter had watched a kid's prank video involving mystery ingredients and secretly labeled several containers with playful names to surprise her mother. Blair agreed to try their own version, believing the labeled ingredients were safe, kid-friendly household materials. Without checking the containers closely, she unknowingly set up the table using her own commercial-strength pool chemicals, which had been placed in the mislabeled containers. Wearing only safety glasses and treating the activity as a lighthearted prank for her daughter, she handled the materials far more casually than she ever would in her classroom. She crushed several chlorinating tablets and funneled them into a 2-liter plastic bottle before carefully adding muriatic acid. The reaction began immediately, generating chlorine gas and intense heat. The bottle walls bulged and whitened from internal pressure, as the exothermic reaction accelerated beyond her expectations. The bottle was already swelling, its plastic whitening and crackling under strain. A sign of imminent failure that would have warned any trained chemist, Blair leaned closer to observe the dramatic changes, her face directly above the increasingly unstable container. Within seconds, the bottle burst violently under pressure, more a rapid rupture than an explosion, sending a caustic spray across the table, striking her face, neck, and chest, causing immediate chemical burns. A pale, yellow-tinged chlorine plume drifted from the reaction site, the sharp odor spreading toward the pool area. Blair stumbled backward, coughing violently as the gas seared her airways. Her breathing grew increasingly labored as airway swelling and spasms set in, leaving her disoriented and struggling to stay upright. Her safety glasses had deflected some of the spray, but they offered no protection against the chlorine gas. She tripped at the pool's edge and fell into 4 feet of water, surfacing once with frothy sputum, an early sign of acute lung injury. The swelling in her airways made each breath ineffective, and the violent coughing left her too weak to keep herself above the water. Her daughter called for help, while a neighbor heard the commotion but kept his distance as the sharp chlorine odor reached his yard. Blair submerged again, her airway injury and violent coughing leaving her too weak and short of breath to keep herself above the water. Emergency responders staged at a safe distance until hazmat teams could ventilate the area. When they finally reached Blair, she had been underwater for several minutes. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, the combination of drowning and severe chemical inhalation proved fatal. What began as a lighthearted backyard prank meant to make her daughter laugh ended in a scene marked by hazmat suits and caution tape. Blair's confidence in her chemistry knowledge led her to overlook the danger of using concentrated pool chemicals for what she assumed was a harmless stunt. Fire investigators determined the cause as accidental chemical mixing, resulting in toxic gas production and container failure. The incident highlighted the dangers of using commercial-grade chemicals without proper safety protocols. It was October 11, 2017. Seattle's skyline stretched endlessly beneath a construction crane, 40 stories above the bustling streets where morning commuters hurried past without looking up. Elias Harlow, 31, had built his career around capturing moments that others couldn't reach. His social media following of 500,000 people knew him for dramatic photography, taken from impossible angles, each image more daring than the last. Elias worked as a freelance photographer, but his real passion was extreme urban exploration. He planned every shot carefully, studying structures and calculating risks, and his audience followed him for dramatic images taken from dangerous heights. The 40-story building under construction offered a perfect sunrise backdrop over Seattle. Elias had checked the weekend schedule and knew security would be light, giving him a narrow chance to capture a selfie with the city 400 feet below. Earlier that week, two friends had joked about a viral prank trend where people leaned over high ledges to mimic extreme confidence. As part of the joke, they told Elias that construction workers had already tested the temporary lifeline cable on the 40th floor, and that it could handle a person's weight for a quick pose. They said it was part of the trend to make the stunt look reckless while actually being safe. Elias believed them, treating the tip as harmless reassurance rather than realizing it was just part of their prank. Weather made the setup risky. 25-mile-per-hour winds cut between towers, and fog left the steel slick with condensation. Safety barriers were minimal, and several scaffold platforms and exterior hoists jutted from different floors, creating hazards along the building's outer frame. Elias brought professional camera equipment and a selfie stick, but no fall protection gear. He had grown confident from years of successful shoots, trusting his experience to keep him safe. The building's temporary lifeline cables looked secure enough to provide a handhold, though they weren't rated for human loads. He climbed to the 40th floor as dawn approached, positioning himself on a steel beam that extended 3 feet beyond the building's edge. The dramatic overhang would create the perfect frame for his shot, with nothing but empty air and the city plaza far below. The first few shots went smoothly. He positioned himself in the exaggerated forward, lean the meme required, angling his body outward to mimic the prank-style pose meant to look reckless but controlled. Elias found his rhythm, leaning back confidently while maintaining balance on the narrow beam. But Seattle's unpredictable wind patterns created sudden gusts that channeled between surrounding towers with surprising force. A sudden cross-gust caught his jacket and shifted his center of gravity just as he was adjusting his camera angle. The temporary lifeline cable he was gripping was secured with a basic clamp not rated to hold a person's weight, and it began pulling away from its mounting bracket under his weight. Elias dropped his selfie stick and grabbed desperately for the steel beam, but his hands were cold and couldn't maintain a grip on the wet metal surface. He fell backward off the beam, tumbling through 400 feet of empty air toward the concrete plaza below. During the fall, his body struck construction equipment and scaffolding, altering his trajectory and adding further blunt trauma before the final impact at approximately 90 miles per hour. The security guard arriving for his morning shift discovered the scene within minutes. The medical examiner later documented extensive blunt force trauma, multiple fractures, internal organ rupture, and skull base fracture consistent with a fall from a height exceeding 400 feet. Elias's camera equipment had fallen separately and lay scattered around his body, the memory card still containing the final images he had captured. Investigators noted that the final images on his camera matched the staged leaning pose he attempted while relying on the temporary lifeline cable he believed was safe to grip. Detectives interviewed his friends, who admitted the false reassurance about the cable had been meant as a harmless prank, leading investigators to classify their involvement as careless but not criminal. What began as a lighthearted attempt to recreate a trending prank pose ended with investigators reconstructing his fall from scattered camera evidence. They ruled the death an accidental trespass fatality, prompting developers to add permanent safety barriers. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.